Thank you very much. I'm immensely honored by your being here and by this turnout. It's really quite overwhelming. Thank you especially to Mike and his committee for all of the work in putting this together. And as far as those cookies are concerned, if you get me some loaves of bread and a few fish, I'll show you a little trick. Well, it's a rather awe-inspiring thing to be invited to give one's last lecture. And I've thought about it a good deal. It does, as Dr. Johnson said, knowing that you're being hanged in the morning wonderfully concentrates your mind. Thinking of this as the last time I have a chance to speak about what matters most, has wonderfully concentrated my mind. I've thought long and hard about it, and in particular in relation to this statement from Søren Kierkegaard, the great 19th century Danish philosopher of religion. Kierkegaard in his journals writes this, so he did not necessarily ever think of this being read by anyone else. It was in his personal journals, published long after his death. There is something quite definite I have to say, and I have it so much upon my conscience that, as I feel, I dare not die without having said it. For the moment I die and thus leave this world, as I understand it, I shall in that very second, at such speed does it go, in that very same second I shall be infinitely far away in a different place, where still within the same second, frightful speed, the question will be put to me, have you uttered the definite message quite definitely? Well, that's of course the great question as I come to think about a last lecture. Have I uttered the great message? Have I uttered the definite message quite definitely? And if this is my last chance to do it, well, thank you for being present while I give it a try. What is the last and what is the definite message that has to be said? Well, I think it's this. It is a statement that I've spoken about many times, preached about many times, prayed about many more times than that. A statement which appears repeatedly in the Gospels of Matthew, Mark, and Luke. It's the statement of Jesus that if you hold on to your life, you lose it. But if you give your life away, it becomes everlasting life. Now, you see, for a very long time, I think I misunderstood that statement. Because for a very long time, when I spoke about it, when I prayed about it, when I preached about it, I thought of it as a commandment, as if Jesus is saying, now that's what you ought to do. That's how you ought to live. And only after a long time did it occur to me that it's not a commandment at all. It's a description. That Jesus is not saying that's how you ought to live. He's saying that's how things are. You want to know what existence is like? It's like this. If you hold on to it, you won't have it. But if you give it away, you can't run out of it. You will see it become everlasting. Because being and giving oneself turn out to be exactly the same thing. There's a way in which that's said very famously, very powerfully, in the first letter of John. The author of the first letter of John's way of saying it is, God is love. My way of saying it, at least for this evening, is that the foundation of existence, the reason there's something rather than nothing, the reason anything exists at all, is self-gift, is love, is the gift of the self to another. That's really an extraordinary claim. But I think, as I look back on my own life, my experience is it is precisely correct, that it is the central thing that needs to be said. that if we're going to exist, we give ourselves away. W.H. Auden, who is a particular favorite poet of mine, wrote in a book review that was published in 1930 that the first criterion of success in any human activity, the necessary preliminary, whether to scientific discovery or to artistic vision, is intensity of attention, or, less pompously, love. That the preliminary to understanding anything, the necessary first step in knowing anyone or anything, is that you have to love that person or thing. Now, Auden says it beautifully here. It's intensity of attention. When I say you have to love something in order to know it, I don't mean that you have to have warm emotions or deep sentimental affection for the thing. That may happen, and that may be wonderful, but that's not the heart of what I mean by love. By the heart of love, I mean an activity. And the activity is giving yourself to something. And if you're really going to know anything, if you're really going to understand anything, you have to give yourself to it first. You have to give it your time and your energy. You have to give it your intelligence. You have to focus yourself on it. You have to give yourself to it. And only then do you ever really understand it. But it's not simply a matter of looking hard at something. It's a matter of a very important first step. Among the many books that I never wrote is a long-planned, often sketched out, occasionally begun, and certainly never completed, attempt at a general, systematic, sacramental theology. And the way in which I had thought about writing that book was as a series of comments, a discussion of a series of propositions. And the first proposition of the book was going to be, things tell you what they are. That you don't have to torture the truth out of things. Everything that exists is open and ready to tell you about itself. It's eager to reveal its innermost depths. That's true of everything that exists. But there's a necessary first step. And if I can illustrate the first step, I will tell you a story. It's the main line of action, the main element of the plot of a very great medieval German epic called Parsifal. And I won't tell you the whole story because it's very long, but the main character, the young man Parsifal, wandering away from his home, is out of the world, as it were, seeking adventure, seeking to learn, seeking to discover himself and the world around him. And one day, as it's drawing toward evening, he comes upon a castle. And he enters the castle and is immediately welcomed by all the people at the castle and becomes the honored guest at dinner that evening. And the host is a man who's dressed as a king, but he's obviously ill. He's lying on a cot and seems to be very weak, but he's very welcoming to Parsifal. The meal goes on, wonderful meal, but at the end, servants enter carrying a cup and a spear. Those of you who are tuned in to things medieval will recognize that the Grail and the spear that pierces the side of Christ have just gotten into the story. They're borne into the room, and the king immediately begins to suffer immense pain. And Parsifal stares in astonishment at these two objects that have been brought in, and at the king, and everything vanishes, except for one servant who tells Parsifal, "You have failed the test, and you must leave." And Parsifal leaves the castle and tries to come back the next day, and the castle's not there. Well, the epic poem goes on, as epic poems are wont to do. The epic poem goes on for many, many years at many, many pages. And Parsifal learns a great deal in the course of the years that he spends wandering. And finally, he finds himself back one evening in front of that castle again. He doesn't know how he's made his way back to it, but there it is. And he enters and is again shown into the dining hall. And once again a meal is served, and the king is still on the cot, looking very weak. And again the grail and the spear are brought into the hall, and the king cries out in great suffering. And this time Parsifal speaks. And what he says is, "What is the source of your pain?" And at that moment the king is healed. Because it turns out the key, the necessary first step, is to ask the right question. Parsifal wasn't supposed to have the answer, but he had to have the right question. And the right question is, in effect, tell me your story. How did you get hurt? What causes this pain? Tell me your story. That, I suggest to you, is the key in coming to know anyone or anything. It's to ask, tell me your story. That's always the right question. And to give an attentive hearing to that story, to attend to what is said, what is shown, what is revealed to you, in the conviction that reality is there to be seen. It's not disguised, it's not hidden from you, it's not hidden behind some veil that you've got to tear off, behind some wall that you've got to knock down. It's not something that you have to, information that you have to bribe or lure out. All you have to do is ask the right question. And the right question is always, tell me your story. Tell me about yourself. Tell me how you got to where you are. In the conviction that reality is waiting to give itself to us. If reality is going to give itself to us, we have first to give ourselves to it. And we do it by asking the right question, by listening, by looking, by paying attention. That's absolutely key. But what do you do with reality when you begin to see a glimpse of the truth of things? What do you do with it? Well, you see, if to have anything is to give it away, if to exist is to give oneself away, then the only thing you can do with the knowledge that you gain about yourself, about others, about the world around you, if you really want to have it, if you really want to possess it, if you really want to know it, if you really want to let it shape you, you've got to give it away. You've got to give it to others. You've got to teach. Now, all of us are engaged in teaching. I've been engaged in it in a very particular and special and absolutely wonderful way for me. But everyone is involved in teaching, because if you want to know anything, you must give it to others. How do we do that? How do we give it to others? Well, in all sorts of ways. But the first step in giving it to others is to be convinced that they want to learn it. Let me tell you yet another story. This is a story of a Sunday afternoon in 1763. James Boswell tells this story in his magnificent biography, his great 18th century life of Dr. Johnson, of Samuel Johnson. It's a beautiful Sunday morning in London, 1763. Johnson and Boswell decide they're going to go for lunch to downriver to Greenwich. So they go down to the Thames embankment and they hire a boat with a young teenager who's going to row them down to Greenwich to have lunch. And Boswell was, as he always was, hounding Johnson with questions and making notes of Johnson's conversation to include in the great biography afterwards. And it must have been dreadful to spend your life with an interviewer constantly at your elbow, but that apparently is what Johnson and Boswell's relationship was like. Boswell asked Johnson, "Do you think that it's necessary for everyone to be classically educated? Do you think for people to lead really fulfilled and good lives, everyone has to be educated in Greek and Latin?" And Johnson said, no, not, of course not. That's not necessary for everyone. It's necessary for those people who are called to be fully educated. But there are vast numbers of people whose lives would not anyway be benefited or shaped, whose would not gain any reward from being educated in that fashion. So to them, such education simply doesn't apply. Why? Not everyone needs to know the songs that the sailors sang as they rowed the Argonauts in the ancient world. And then Johnson turned to the young boy who was rowing the boat and said, "You boy, what would you give to know what the Argonauts sang?" And Boswell says, the boy replied, "Sir, I would give whatever I had." And Boswell says, Johnson was so pleased with the response that he tipped the boy double. Tipped the boy double? I'd have set up a trust fund for him to go to Oxford or Cambridge. With all due respect to St. Thomas Aquinas, who's often described as the patron saint of the intellectual life, the patron saint of the intellectual life, for my money, is an unnamed teenager from 1763 who would have given everything he had simply to know what the Argonauts sang. Because to know anything is a great gift. Knowledge has no limits. We are all hungry to know. And we begin knowing when we ask the right question, when we invite reality to open itself. Teachers are the people who get the immense privilege of introducing others to what might be the right question. In order to do that, we have to be immensely respectful of one another. And that requires a trust about the possibility of friendship. Now, one of the things that's puzzled me greatly over the last 15 years or so has been the disappearance of friendship as a topic for people to think about. In the ancient world, everybody regarded friendship as a subject about which philosophy ought to be interested. That was true of the Middle Ages. Countless people wrote on friendship in the Middle Ages. It's true of the Renaissance. And all of a sudden, in the 17th century, it disappears as a topic. People just, certainly people enjoy friendship. People have friends, obviously. But it's no longer seen as a philosophical question. How is it possible that we are capable of friendship? Matter of fact, I've often thought that if I were defining a human being, that I don't know that I could come up with a better definition than the animal that's capable of friendship. What is friendship, and what does it mean that we're capable of it? It's something that embraces the whole person. Cicero, who's one of those folks of the ancient world who wrote on friendship, Cicero in his book on friendship defines it as a full agreement on all matters of importance, both human and divine, combined with genuine benevolence and sincere affection. That's a wonderful definition, because you notice what it says is friendship takes the whole person. It's intellectual. It's about agreement on all of the most important issues in life. But it's also a matter of will. It's benevolence. It's genuinely wanting the best for that other person. And it's also something that involves the emotions. It involves sincere affection. Everything that makes us up as human beings gets tapped by being a friend. Intellectually, volitionally, emotionally, everything around us is involved in friendship. How is it possible that we're capable of friendship? I think it's possible precisely because it is the very essence of what it is to exist. You see, we're back to be is to give yourself away. God is love. Hold on to yourself and you won't exist. Give yourself away and you can't cease to exist. That we come to exist in our friendships. And one of the things that happens in our friendships is we get to learn what it is that our friend needs to know, wants to know, longs to know. And we, insofar as we're able, help the friend to know, to gain that knowledge and experience by helping them to discern what the right question might be to ask. That's at the heart of what it is to be a human being. We live all too easily in a world, and everybody has always lived in such a world. This is not some, by the way, some insult to our modern world. Everyone is confronted with this destructive element of the world. We live in a world in which it's possible for people to think that they really exist by having things, by holding on to things, by possessing things. It is an enormous shift to come to recognize that you only have things by giving them away, by offering them to others. I don't know how you're going to give yourself away. I've tried long and hard to figure out how I give myself away most effectively, most fully. I don't know how you're going to do it, what's required of your generation. But I urge you to be immensely attentive to the question. Attend to the ways in which you can give yourself to the people around you. Attend to the ways in which you can enter into friendship with others. Look carefully at the ways in which you can help them refine what the important questions are for them to ask. And begin by asking them the great question for you. Tell me your story. What makes you the way you are? Why is what's important to you? Enter into that question answering and asking with immense respect, with genuine affection, with real benevolence, with friendship. So if the most important thing to say is that to exist is to give yourself away, and if the way we begin to do that is by attending to others, and if the way we attend to others is to say, tell me your story, and if to be able to genuinely hear that story, we have to be open to friendship. What does that say about what I've done with my life? What does that say about teaching theology? Well, there are so many ways to teach theology badly that one scarcely knows where to begin describing them. But one enormously influential and wonderfully destructive way of teaching theology is to think that it's imparting information which somehow or other we've gotten, either God's given it to us, or we've figured it out, or it's in the sacred text, or some authoritative body like the church has told us this, and our job is to try and figure out how it can possibly be, how it fits together, and how we can hand it on to others. That's an immense mistake. Theology is not about getting information from God. Theology is about experiencing God. Theology is first and foremost a matter of examining our experience. It's not about believing all sorts of things that somebody has told us we ought to believe. It's about the exploration of our lives as human beings on the deepest and richest levels we can examine our lives, and seeing what the implications of that examination are, how it leads us to a deeper knowledge of the foundation of being. So one of the things that I've tried to do in teaching theology in my life has been to invite people to check their experience. The teaching of theology is not, here is the doctrine, I'll give it to you and explain it to you, you accept it. The teaching of theology is, here's what people for now going on 20 centuries have found to be insightful and important and illuminating and revelatory in the Christian tradition. See if it matches up with your experience. See if the ways in which people have lived and prayed and thought, the way they've entered into friendships and marriages, the way they've raised their children, the way they've shaped their society, see if all of that tradition in some way illuminates, helps you to deal with, helps you to understand your experience at this moment. It's about holding together the tradition and experience and allowing experience to give new insight into the tradition and allowing the tradition to give coherence and an intelligibility, a way of understanding to everything we experience throughout our lives. What does that mean? Well, it means, if you're going to teach it, it means you've got to spend a lot of time with the tradition. You've got to spend a lot of time talking to a lot of dead people. You've got to spend a lot of time talking to Thomas Aquinas and Augustine, to Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. You've got to spend a lot of time talking to Ignatius and Francis of Assisi, to Teresa of Avila and Catherine of Siena. You've got to spend a lot of time talking to a lot of people about what they saw as important in their lives. But you've also got to spend a lot of time talking to your contemporaries and examining yourself. It means you have to be very reflective about your own experience. It means that you have to carefully attend to what seems to be most important in your life and in the lives of the people around you. Plato famously maintains that Socrates said that the unreflective life is not worth living. William James remarked that, yes, that was perfectly true, but it was also true that the unlived life wasn't worth reflecting on. That one has to live life. One has to enter into commitments and relationships with others in order to have anything worth reflecting on. It's not a matter of locking ourselves in some ivory tower, even very comfortable ivory towers like the BC campus. It's not a matter of locking ourselves in an ivory tower and thinking our way toward reality. It's about being part of reality, about living. It's about entering into experience. It's about seeking out new experiences. It's about being a little bit daring with your life. It's about doing what you didn't think it was in you to do. Now, I must confess, I feel rather hypocritical saying that to you, because from one point of view, few people have managed to live a more sheltered life than I. But I also find, as I look back over my life, that I surprised myself over and over again with the discovery that I was able to do and to feel what I never thought I could do or feel. Maybe one of the reasons that friendship seems so important to me as a subject to think about is that I'm constantly astonished that I'm able to experience friendship. It's an extraordinary thing to discover that you can give yourself to another. If I may tell you yet another story. This one, we started with the Middle Ages in Germany, and then we went to 1763. This time we go to 1947. A very good year. It was the year I was born. My mother always told this story. These were the days when pregnant mothers, as they came time to give birth, frequently were anesthetized. That natural childbirth was a kind of odd idea in that generation. And so my mother remembers being at the hospital on Mother's Day, of all days of the year. I was a Mother's Day present. Cheaper than candy, and lasts longer than flowers. And Mother remembers being at the hospital and it being time that they thought that they should bring her to the delivery room from the waiting room, and she was anesthetized. And when she woke up, it was Monday morning. And she was lying in bed, looking out the window of her room, and she realized the baby had come. The baby was delivered. She didn't know anything about it. She didn't know whether it was a boy or a girl. She didn't know whether the delivery had been a safe one or not. She didn't know whether the baby was alive. Until they arrived to tell her that it was a boy and everything was fine. But she says, as she laid in the bed that morning, waiting to hear what had happened, she often described it as the single most important religious moment in her life. Because, she said, she had this immense sense of responsibility that somewhere in that hospital, somewhere in the world, there was now a life, and as she said, she would never again be able to make a decision without taking that other life into account. That what had happened was the taking on of a solemn but joyful obligation. Well, you see, all of us take on solemn and joyful obligations in our lives. For most of you, one of the most solemn and I hope most joyful will be your marriage. It will be your parenthood. But it will come, there will be moments when you find yourself genuinely called to gather all the strands of your life together, as it were, at one moment in your hands, and to give them over to someone or something else. You have to live life. You have to enter into relationships with other people. You have to commit yourself to causes. You have to dedicate yourself to ideals. You have to be willing to give yourself to work if you're going to have anything worth reflecting on. And then you can bring the fruits of that reflection. You can bring the meaning of that experience. You can bring the center of all of those events that shape who you are, that life that you've lived. You can bring it to what you learn from the tradition and see where they touch one another. And if they don't touch one another, then say that too. Do not ever be afraid of saying, I've tried to understand the tradition, and I've tried to understand my experience, and they just don't fit with one another. And don't begin by assuming that your experience is wrong. Be immensely respectful to the traditions that shape us, but don't be subservient to them. Remember, those traditions have been shaped and formed by people exactly like you. They have immense richness and wisdom, but they also have blind spots. They also have places where they're underdeveloped. They need more reflection. They need you and me to reflect on them. They need the generations yet ahead of us to reflect on them. So don't feel that you have to shoehorn your experience into the shapes and forms of the Christian tradition. Be willing to shatter the tradition, to make it bigger, to make it richer, to make it more inclusive than it was when it was passed on to you. The tradition is there for you to develop, not in order to hem you in or tie you down or confine you to past forms and shapes of experience. Be honest with your experience, be respectful of the tradition, and hold them together. That's what theology does. And that's what I think has been so important. That's why it's been so important for me to be engaged in theology, but it's been so important for me to give it to others. I can honestly say, you know, it's often, you've heard this many times in different ways, that the best way to learn something is to teach it. That is absolutely, literally true. I cannot tell you how many times I've heard myself giving a lecture and said to myself, by George Himes, that was really brilliant. Most things are when I hear them said in the reassuring ring of my own voice. But I've been astonished at what I found myself saying because I hadn't expected to say that. That it literally is in the process of passing it on that I discovered what I really thought. That I saw the implications of what I was saying. You discover it by giving it to others. It all happens in conversation. I might, since this is the last lecture, I might admit to something or acknowledge something that you may not have been aware of. And that is that all of the times all the times I've preached, all the times I've lectured, have always been in my own mind experiences of conversation. Now, you may say, well, what kind of conversation was it? You did all the talking. No. I did all the verbalizing. But a great deal of the communicating was done by you. It's done by your being here. It's done by your body language. It's done by the expression on your face. It's done by those little nods when you agree with something that you don't even know that you make. Or those other moments when you give a puzzled, I don't think so. And you're not aware of doing it. We're in conversation all the time. And it's in that conversation that I discover what it is I believe, what it is I teach, where I learn theology. We're all engaged at that discovery together. So if you are going to learn anything by giving it away, how do you give it away? Are you all going to become teachers? Well, yes, in one sense you are, but you're not all necessarily going to have tenure and receive a salary. What does it mean for you to give to others what you have what you learn about yourself and about the world around you? How do you do that? Well, the first way you do it is by allowing it to shape you. I've come to think over the course of years that if there is one single virtue that I would love to believe that I had, if there's one single virtue which I think is crucial in other people's lives, it's integrity. But by integrity, I don't mean simply honesty. Honesty is wonderful. I'm all in favor of honesty. If anybody asks you, what did Himes say about honesty in his last lecture? He came out in favor of it. But I don't mean honesty when I talk about integrity. I mean the word very literally. It's the quality of being an integer, a whole number. It's the quality of being one whole thing. I'll give you my favorite, perhaps odd image for this. It's what happens at your wake. When your spouse talks to your pastor, who talks to your business partner, who speaks to your next door neighbor, who talks to your in-law, who speaks to your children, who talks to your doctor, who speaks to your attorney, that they all know that they met the same person. That you weren't a series of roles that were played. You weren't a series of masks that you wore in different relationships. That they can all say, yeah, that was the one I knew too. That they all knew you because you were one and the same. You had integrity. You were a whole. You were complete. How do you teach? You teach by becoming whole, by becoming who you are, by having integrity, by everyone you come in contact with meeting the same person. So the first way you teach is with integrity. The second way you teach is with generosity. Again, I feel hypocritical speaking of this. And I could speak about it much more easily if I talked about the generosity of the hearers rather than the generosity of the speaker. But it's the effervescence of being. One of the most striking things about existence is the way it bubbles up. I think the name for that effervescence of existence, that bubbling up, that overflowing quality of existence, I think that name for it is joy. It's about having deep delight in what you do and how you live and who the people around you are. It's a sense of immense joy, of immense pleasure in the depth and the truth of one's experience. A line that I ran across in a 19th century novel, a novel that I don't especially recommend to you, by Henry Adams, called Esther. There's a line in it in which Adams says, and I think this line is the one really memorable statement in the book. Adams says, "What a wonderful thing it is to wake in the morning with the mind turned outward instead of in. I've often wondered about this, whether I have a kind of natural bent toward melancholy. In this sense, that it's very easy for my mind to turn in on itself. To get up at the boarding and have your mind turned outward, to get up at the boarding saying, today I get to do this. Today I get to see that one. Today I get to work with these people. Today I get to be involved in this. And to feel excited and energized and to be filled with joy by it. That's the most wonderful thing in life. It prevents one from getting trapped with one's thoughts turned inward. I suggest to you that that's one of the ways, one of the qualities that you bring to teaching, to giving yourself away to others, to giving others the fruits of your reflection and your experience. You do it with joy. And most importantly, you do it with confidence in their importance and in the importance of what you have to say. A number of times, graduate students, people, especially sometimes my teaching assistants, my TAs, have asked me over the years, what do you do to become a really good teacher? And I often say to them, look, there's the stuff you immediately expect, the obvious stuff. You know, you plan the lecture and you organize the course and you obviously expect that. But the most important thing you do, the thing that moves you from being a competent and effective teacher, I think, to being a great teacher, is you've got to fall in love with who you teach and fall in love with what you teach. If you are in love with what you teach, if you really are convinced this is so good, so important, so valuable, that it's wonderful to be able to teach it. And if you really fall in love with who you teach, if you really are convinced that those people are so marvelous, so loving, so gifted, so bright, so immensely important, then your desire to give this really great gift to those really great people will force you to become a good teacher. You won't have any way to avoid it. It'll push you and prod you because this is so good and they're so good, they deserve one another. You gotta fall in love with who you teach and what you teach. And that will make you a really good teacher. And what will all of that do? Well, I come back to my beginning. It will allow you to fully exist because it will be a way of giving yourself away. Now, I can't prove logically a single syllable I've said to you this evening. The only demonstration of it is, live it and see if it works. Try it and see what happens. I mean, did you have anything else so important to do with your life? Give it a try. Live as if by giving yourself to others, you will not be able to run out of existence. And I am convinced that you will discover that you cannot not exist. That your existence will be richer and fuller than you ever dreamt. And what does that mean about your destiny? Well, I don't know, but I suspect I'm closer to finding out than you are. that you will, it means, I think, that when you get, as Kierkegaard says, far away in an instant, that when the question is put to you, did you say the quite definite message quite definitely? You'll be able to say yes, because the quite definite message is who you are. You see, the quite definite message that I had to say was Michael Himes. That's a different message than you have to say. But do say it quite definitely, because it's all important. I've always thought that the single most elegant farewell that I know of is Chaucer's at the end of the Canterbury Tales. And I'll paraphrase it to bring to a close what I'm saying to you this evening. Chaucer says, "If I have done any of you any good, I ask you to give thanks to God. And if I have done any of you any harm, I ask you to credit it to my lack of ability and not my lack of will, for I would gladly have done better if I could." Well, I would gladly have done better if I could, but it was the best I had in me. And the thing I wish for you is that sometime in your life, you get a chance to say to people who mean an enormous amount to you what it is that has been truest in your own life. Because it's at a moment like that that you know that everything you gave away has been given back in spades. Thank you very much.